When the General Wayne was built in 1704, Marion was a country crossroads, a day's ride from Philadelphia.
It was a place where the blue bloods and the old money of the Philadelphia main line would go for their Sunday supper. Nothing ever very fancy, meat and potatoes types of food.
Growing up in the area, that was one of my favorite spots to go.
But times and tastes change. By the 1980s, the blue bloods were mostly blue hairs, and young urban professionals began moving into the main line's mansions.
As the main line changed, in particular Lower Merion, and more people came there with a more sophisticated idea of what they wanted when they went out to dinner. The restaurant had started to lose some customers.
The Old Inn served up its last slab of prime rib in 1994. Shut down and up for sale, it caught the eye of two up-and-coming Philly restaurateurs. In December of 1995, Jim Webb and Guy Saleo bought Marion's General Wayne Inn for $1.2 million. Business, by all accounts, was cooking, but the real heat was in the kitchen.
In the beginning of their business partnership, they got along well. However, the pressures of the financial responsibilities they had caused a lot of tension between the two of them.
Jim and Guy would often flare up. They had their bad days and their good days.
It's like a marriage, even more so than a marriage. You spend a good 12 to 15 hours a day with that person. So yeah, they argued. They argued a fair amount.
The friction was usually caused by Webb's demand for perfection.
If you didn't work hard for Jim Webb, or if he didn't like the way you were doing something, he didn't hold back. He told you what he thought. That kind of passion is what made him successful.
Whereas Saleo, at least the way Webb saw it, rarely started.
Saleo was apparently just sitting at the bar drinking most of the day. Webb would berate Saleo on a daily basis regarding his performance or lack thereof.
The biggest problem Jim Webb, his partner, had with him was keeping him out of the pants of the staff.
Despite being married, Saleo had a fling with a 19-year-old line cook named Felicia Moyes in the fall of 1996.
He built up her expectations that they were going to get married. She had come home and told her mother, get ready for a wedding.
It was wishful thinking, because as things turned out, Felicia Moyes and Guy Saleo would never walk down the aisle.
That night, they closed up early because it wasn't busy. I think it was around 10 o'clock.
It was the night after Christmas, December 26, 1996.
Felicia Moyes and Guy Saleo were leaving there to go have some drinks at a bar in Upper Darby. Jim Webb stayed behind.
They had asked James Webb if he would like to join them. Mr. Webb said he would, but he had some cleaning up to do.
Jim said he'd join them later. He never showed up.
They weren't concerned about that because it was often typical that he would say he was going to show up somewhere and wouldn't.
The next morning, Jim's truck was already in the parking lot when Saleo showed up for work.
He went upstairs into the office. The door was shut. When he opened the door, he saw the body.
Jim Webb was laying on the floor. He was facing up. On the left side of his forehead, there was a large lump, and there was some blood pooled around the left side of his face.
Panicked, Saleo ran back downstairs for help.
He told the pastry chef, who coincidentally was a nurse, to come up and see what happened.
She went upstairs and determined Jim Webb was dead, his body was cold, and they called the police.
911, what's the emergency? What's the emergency to General Wayne? What's the problem? I think our executive chef's dead.
Unit 25, General Wayne in the hospital case, unresponsive, was a 31-year-old male.
She went up and observed that he had a lump on his head and concluded from that he must have fallen and hit his head.
The bump on Jim's forehead wasn't a bump at all.
The lump ultimately turned out to be the projectile under the skin. There was no exit wound, so therefore you don't have that secondary bleeding. Once a person dies, of course, their heart stops beating, so there's no pressure to push blood out of the injury. So he didn't have a lot of blood because it was an instantaneous, roughly instantaneous death.
When he found the gunshot wound in the back of Jim Webb's head, we had a conversation that information at that point was not going to leave the office. We consciously wanted to keep that information to ourselves, knowing that the only people that would know that would be us and the person who shot Jim Webb. During the conversation, Guy Saleo came out right in front of me, went directly to Robin Webb, Jim's wife, hugged her, and said, "Jim's been shot."
When Guy Saleo seemed to know, almost without talking with anyone, that his partner had been shot, I don't think it was very long after that that they began to focus on him seriously as a suspect.
There was only one problem: Felicia Moyse.
She provided an alibi for him because she could testify that she was with him at various points in the evening of the murder.
She absolutely didn't believe that he did it.
He left with Felicia to go to a bar, Mulligan's. He said that he went directly there, met Felicia, and then went home. That was it. He didn't know anything about the murder.
And neither, it appeared, did Felicia.
She submitted to a polygraph, which she passed, saying that, indicating to us she had nothing to do with it.
Saleo also submitted to a polygraph. The results were inconclusive. So, as far as the cops were concerned, was Saleo's alibi. He and Felicia had gone to Mulligan's, but they'd taken separate cars.
She had to drop something, a Christmas present or something, off at a girlfriend's.
And then she went and met Saleo at Mulligan's. So now there's a window of time within which nobody is with Saleo.
Saleo had opportunity, and once the cops looked into the inn's finances, they realized he may have had motive too.
It never really made money that we could tell. It was spiraling debt from day one. They kept taking out smaller loans from a company called Transmedia, as well as a line of credit from PNC Bank. They just never made it to where they wanted to be.
The overhead was very high, and they needed to make a certain threshold each month, and they weren't making it. And you could see over time that they were going deeper and deeper in the red. The ability to pay back the loans was becoming difficult.
In addition to the banks, the partners also needed to pay back the $100,000 they had borrowed from Saleo's father.
Guy Saleo had convinced his father to give a large sum of money to help finance the restaurant, money that Guy's father wanted back.
The Saleos were coming to Jim Webb and the corporation and demanding their money back, and at the time they didn't have the money.
There was, however, one scenario that would allow Saleo to get his father's money back: Jim Webb's death.
There was a $625,000 insurance policy on the life of James Webb.
The policy was payable to Guy Saleo. Webb had one on Guy, too.
They took out substantial insurance policies on each other. And those policies had one purpose, which is that if one partner died, that the other one would be able to meet the debt load of the restaurant.
And after the debts were paid off?
The remaining portion would go to the surviving partner.
That would have been more than sufficient, the policy, basically to repay Mr. Saleo, and also then to give a lot of other working capital for the General Wayne, and then that would have left Guy Saleo as the one owner running the place.
On December 28, 1996, the Lower Merion Township Police went to Guy Saleo's house with a search warrant.
We recovered from his house a .25 caliber gun. The murder weapon was a .25 caliber gun. We started doing some background investigation. We found out that the .125 caliber gun had just been purchased about a month prior to the murder.
It looked as if the cops had just found the gun that killed Jim Webb. They hadn't.
That gun is tested by our ballistics people and is ruled out as having been able to commit the killing.
The cops were short a murder weapon. Soon after, they were short a witness, too.
In February of 1997, Felicia Moyse committed suicide at the home of her parents.
Around Merion, people wondered if the old inn had claimed another victim.
Is it a coincidence? Did she know more? What did she know? Did she kill herself because of that murder?
The official answer, according to the cops, was no.
Shortly after the murder, Guy broke the news to her that he was going back to his wife, that he wasn't going to leave her.
Felicia's suicide did, however, firm up the DA's sense that the investigation was on the right track.
They were buying time to get all their ducks in a row. They knew they had one shot at Guy, and they didn't want to mess it up.
He had done a very good job of making sure nobody saw him do it. He had not said to anybody that he committed the crime. He had every reason to be at that location, so therefore fingerprints or hairs or fibers or those sort of things are of no value to us. So it was a very difficult case.
Finally, on October 25th, prosecutors charged Guy Saleo with first-degree murder. And on August 1st, the jury reached a verdict.
It was like panic time. It was very nerve-wracking. We all held hands. We were scared to death, but we knew that Guy had done it.
The jury agreed. Guy Saleo was found guilty.
When they read that verdict, it was the best thing I ever heard.
On January 4th, 2002, Guy Saleo was sentenced to life without parole. He immediately filed an appeal, claiming that Felicia Moyse had actually murdered Webb.
He never said Felicia did it until after he was convicted of the murder. And then all of a sudden, he realized that Felicia may have done this.
He now says that Felicia had done the murder and that she couldn't live with herself, so she killed herself, which we think is total nonsense. I mean, nobody would stand trial and run the risk of life in prison without telling us that sooner.
2 months after the murder, he could have come and said, well, she's dead now. She's the one who did it. She took one of my guns. So he really never had a good reason for not saying it was her.
Since the appeal failed, he's now earning 17 cents an hour working in the kitchen at Pennsylvania's Somerset Correctional Institute. Few people in Marion miss him.
He was always very self-centered. When he blamed Felicia, he was just ruining another family. He had ruined everybody else's family. And he was still trying to save himself and get out of it.
There are, on the other hand, plenty of people who savor the memory of Jim Webb.
When he died, I lost one of my best friends. There's no question about it.
Oh, and they miss his cooking too.
It was a part of him. It was in his heart and his soul, and he would have continued to do it just as well. He had a lot of good years left in him.
His signature dish, one of my favorites, was a lobster rolled in chicken breast, rolled in pistachio crust. Fantastic. I haven't had it since.